3.2 day 2, we're going to look at multiplying complex numbers as well as solving. So we're going to multiply two complex numbers. You're going to use the distributive property or the FOIL method, just as you do when multiplying real numbers or algebraic expressions. Remember to simplify I squared to -1. So multiply, write the answer in standard form. Standard form is, remember, a plus bi. So the constant in the front and then the bi in the back. So let's do 4i times -6 plus i. So we're going to distribute. 4 times -6 is -24, and there's the I. Then we have 4i times I, so it's a positive 4i and then square. So the square is the one that we have to simplify. Remember that I squared equals -1. So let's change that. We have -24i plus the 4, and then the I squared changes to a -1. So 4 times -1 is a -4. And then we have our -24i. So we have to write it in standard form. So therefore, -4 goes in the front and -24i is in the back. So let's try letter B. We can use FOIL, or let's go ahead and just do the box method. And then, so we're multiplying in. So 9 and then a -2i and -4 and a 7i. So -4 times 9 is -36. 4 times 2, that's negative times negative, so positive 8i. 9 times 7i is a 63i. And then 7i times -2i, that's a -14i squared. So we can combine like terms. We know that we can combine 63i and 8i. So let's write out what we have. We have -36, and I'll go ahead and write it out here. 63i plus 8i, and then minus 14i squared. So we can combine the 63 plus 8i, and that's going to become, -36 plus a 71i, and then minus 14i squared. So we have to simplify the I squared. So this is -36 plus 71i minus 14 times -1. So that sign changes. It'll be positive, and we need to remember that it goes to the front. So this is going to be -36 plus 14, because negative times a negative is positive, and then plus a 71i. So combine -36 plus 14. That gives me a -22, and then plus 71i, and that is done. So go ahead and try number 11, 12, and 13 here. So we tried this out. Number 11, you would get -30i squared. Remember, I squared becomes a -1, so -30 times -1 is a positive 30. For the second one, number 12, you distribute, so that becomes 8i minus I squared. So it's 8i minus, and then the I squared changes to a -1. So that actually changes to a positive 1. Write it in standard form. It's 1 plus 8i. Then you multiply number 13, and so you would get 15, 5i, -3i, and -I squared. So 5i minus 3i is 2i. So you get 15 plus 2i minus a -1. So that becomes a positive 1. So 15 plus 1 is 16, and then plus 2i. Let's look at solving quadratic equations. And now that we know what I is, we can actually solve these all the way. So we have x squared plus 4 equals 0. So let's solve. We have to subtract 4 from both sides. So we're going to solve by square roots. We have x squared equals -4. Now we take the square root. Now previously we would say that, oh, it's a negative, and so therefore it's no real solution. But now that we know about I equaling square root of -1, we can simplify this all the way now. So we get a plus or minus square root of -1 times 2 times 2. And then remember, square root of -1 is I, and then the 2 comes out. But you have to write this in standard form. So it's plus or minus 2i. Okay, and if you notice the -4 here, okay, so that does come out because that's just 2 times 2. This could be factorable. If you could do that, that is great. But you can kind of see that this would be x plus 2i, x minus 2i equals 0. Okay, so that's just if you can see it. If not, just solve it by square roots. Letter B, let's solve that one. So what we want to do is we're going to add 11 to both sides. So now we have 2x squared equals negative 36 divided by 2. So x squared equals negative 18. Let's take the square root of both sides. So x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 9 times 2, or x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 3 times 3 times 2. And then 3 comes out. We know the negative 1 comes out as an I. So x equals plus or minus 3I root 2. So go ahead and try number 14 through 19 on your own. All right, if you tried this out, number 14, you would have gotten plus or minus I root 13. Now notice the 13 is not perfect. It stays under the square root. Number 15, that is plus or minus I root 38. So I tried to break it down. You should always check to make sure if it does or doesn't break down. This is 2 times 19, which is both prime, or they both don't simplify, so therefore you leave it as I root 38. Number 16, you subtract 11 from both sides. You get x squared equals negative 8. When you square root and simplify, you get plus or minus 2I root 2. 17 is plus or minus 2I root 7. Number 18 is plus or minus 2I root 2. And number 19 is plus or minus I square root of 6.